Welcome back to Lord of the Mysteries, where the plot twists hit harder than that Monday morning hangover. If you're here for mysteries, magic, and the occasional, what the hell just happened, you're in the right place. Now, before we dive into this wild ride chapters 91 to 100, go ahead and tap that subscribe button, because let's be honest, you don't want to be the only one who missed out on this madness. Plus, subscribing gives you more thrills than your ex ever did. Let's get into it. Chapter 91. Solution. The scenery started to warp like reality was getting a little too drunk at happy hour. Then it faded away. When Klein snapped out of his dreamy state, his vision adjusted to the gloom in the room. And just like that, he was back to the grind. He knew that Benson, with his measly pound and 10 soli, about 30 soli a week, wasn't exactly living the dream when it came to keeping the family afloat. Klein was pretty sure that, by normal standards, Benson was low-key struggling. And Klein had once thought most workers were pulling in around 20 soli a week. Turns out, that was optimistic. He remembered Melissa mentioning the sorry state of things down on Lower Street, where 5, 7, or even 10 families were packed into one tiny room like sardines, except way less fresh. He also remembered Benson dropping a truth bomb about how the kingdom's economy had taken a nosedive recently, thanks to the situation in the southern continent. Even the damn maids, who got room and board, were only raking in between 3 soli and 6 pence to 6 soli a week. That was barely enough for a decent drink. Klein rubbed his temples, staying silent long enough for Sir Deweyville to finally ask, "Officer, aren't you going to say something?" The shrinks I usually visit babble on and on, asking questions that make me feel worse. Though I gotta admit, I'm feeling pretty zen right now. Almost fell asleep. Haven't even heard the usual cries and moans. How the hell did you pull that off? Klein reclined in his chair, not rushing to answer. Instead, he hit Deweyville with a soft but solid question. "Sir, you ever heard of lead poisoning? Know how dangerous that stuff is?" Deweyville was silent for a beat, then nodded slowly. "Didn't know before, but I do now. Are you saying all this mess in my head is because I feel guilty about my workers?" Before Klein could drop some wisdom, Deweyville went on, as if he were still wheeling and dealing in the boardroom. "Yeah, sure, I felt guilty at first, but I made it right. I pay my workers better than anyone else in the industry. While Backlund pays porcelain workers 8 soli, I pay 10, sometimes more. People hate me for that. Makes it harder for them to find labor. If it weren't for the Grain Act forcing farmers into bankruptcy and pushing them into cities, the competition would have had to pay more too." He smirked, probably feeling like a saint, then continued. "I even told my supervisors to pull workers out of dangerous zones if they start showing symptoms like headaches or blurred vision. Hell, if it's serious, I let them get help from my charity foundation. So yeah, I think I've done more than enough." Klein, his voice as emotionless as a dead fish, said, "Sir, you might not realize just how crucial a week's pay is for someone who barely has enough to scrape by. Losing a job, even for a few days, can destroy a family's entire world." After a pause, Klein continued, "But I've got to ask, why wouldn't someone as kind as you install proper equipment to protect your workers from lead poisoning?" Deweyville chuckled bitterly and gazed at the ceiling. "Well, if I did that, I'd be bleeding money. I couldn't compete. I mean, I already don't care that much about profits, but I'd still be throwing cash down the drain. It wouldn't change the industry, wouldn't force others to follow suit. Some factories even sneakily hire slaves to cut costs, so what would be the point?" Klein clasped his hands and, after a brief silence, said, "Sir, your psychological illness is the result of guilt that's been quietly festering, even though you think it's long gone. Something triggered it recently, blowing up your problems like a keg of gunpowder." Deweyville frowned. "Triggered? What could that be? I don't recall anything out of the ordinary." Klein's rocking chair creaked softly as he explained, "You fell asleep for a bit just now and told me about something. Something you didn't realize was a big deal." Deweyville raised a brow. "Hypnosis?" Klein sidestepped the question. "You once saw a young girl, one of your workers, dying on the street on her way to the factory. She was a victim of lead poisoning." Deweyville massaged his temples, looking perplexed. Yeah, I might have seen something like that, but it's all fuzzy." His mind, ravaged by insomnia, could barely grasp the memory. Still, he pressed on. "What was her name?" And more importantly, how the hell do I fix this? Klein didn't hesitate. Two things. First, the girl was named Haley Walker. She's the one you told me about. You need to find her parents and give them more compensation. Second, you need to educate the public about the dangers of lead poisoning. Use your charity foundation to help affected workers, and if you make it into Parliament, fight for laws to protect them. Deweyville sighed and sat up, chuckling at the absurdity. I'll handle the rest, but passing a law? Yeah, right. We're talking about competing with other nations. If we do that, our factories will crumble and everyone will be out of work. Even charities couldn't save the avalanche of poor folks that would follow. He got out of bed, straightened his collar, and addressed Klein. Find Haley's parents. We'll start there. And officer, stay with me to keep tabs on my mental state. All right, Klein agreed, rising and adjusting his checkered police uniform. At 11 a.m., Deweyville's living room was a gallery of old and poor. Haley's parents walked in, thin as rails, with faces creased by time and hardship. The father hunched slightly, while the mother had a mole under her eye. They looked exactly like the picture Klein had seen through Haley's memories, just more worn out by life. Good morning, honorable sir, they greeted Deweyville, their voices shaking with nerves. Deweyville, massaging his forehead, cut to the chase. Are you Haley Walker's parents? Didn't she also have a brother and a 2-year-old sister? Haley's mom replied, barely managing to hold it together. Yes, sir. Her brother hurt his leg down at the harbor, so he's watching over her sister. Deweyville sighed deeply. I'm truly sorry for what happened to Haley. Her parents' eyes reddened instantly, fighting back tears. They muttered thanks, one over the other, their voices cracking. Police told us it was lead poisoning. Oh, my poor Haley, only 17. Deweyville leaned forward, his tone growing serious. That was our fault. I apologize. I will compensate you fairly. Her salary was 10 soldi a week. 1 year is 520 soldi, 26 pounds. Let's say she could have worked for 10 more years. He turned to his butler. Cullen, give them 300 pounds. 300 pounds? Haley's parents were floored. Chapter 92, Psychological Expert. Mass hysteria? Sir Deweyville, who had been binge-watching psych documentaries, meeting many psychiatrists, recently, mulled over the term Klein had just dropped. Despite being nosy, his butler, bodyguards, and servants didn't dare make a peep since none of them had the balls to speak without permission. Power move. As for Sergeant Gate, the guy was looking at Klein like he just spoke in Klingon, clearly clueless about what mass hysteria even meant. Klein, resisting the urge to drum his fingers like some supervillain, calmly explained, humans can get tricked real easy by their senses. Mass hysteria is like a group brain fart. It's a psychogenic illness where people freak out together because they're all playing follow the leader with their anxiety. Sir Deweyville, Sergeant Gate, and the rest of the squad looked as confused as a squirrel in traffic, but they all nodded like they totally understood. Yeah, right. To break it down for you, Klein said, sounding like a professor who's so done with his students, here's a case I worked on before. Dude throws a dinner party, invites 35 guests, and midway through, he feels like he's gonna hurl. So, he does. Next thing you know, he's got diarrhea. Bad case of the bubble guts, right? He's convinced it's food poisoning, so he tells everyone at the party while they're en route to the hospital. In 2 hours, more than 30 guests have diarrhea, and 26 are gagging like they're on some bad roller coaster. They basically turned the hospital into a clown car of sick people. Turns out, the first guy didn't even have food poisoning. He just couldn't handle the change in weather and his cold drink. The wild part? None of the guests were actually sick. 0 food poisoning. Klein shrugged like it was no biggie. That's mass hysteria. Sir Deweyville nodded slowly, impressed. Humans really are gullible idiots. No wonder Emperor Roselle once said that if you repeat a lie enough times, it becomes reality. Officer, what's your name? You're the best psych expert I've ever met, and trust me, I've seen my share of quacks. Inspector Moretti, Klein replied, pointing to his epaulet like a cool cop in a TV show. Sir, your spooky problem is temporarily solved. Now, go hit the hay. If you manage to sleep like a baby, we'll peace out without waking you. All right. Deweyville, looking like he just got out of a bar brawl, rubbed his temples and headed upstairs. Half an hour later, a police carriage rolled away from the front of Deweyville's mansion. When Sergeant Gate hopped off and returned to the station, Inspector Toll looked at Klein and chuckled. Man, you had me thinking you were a legit psychologist back there. Klein just smirked, his face like stone. Had a little experience with it before, that's all. Tolle stayed quiet, probably realizing he was in way over his head as they reached 36 Zoutland Street. Thanks for the help. Now Sir Deweyville can finally catch some Z's. Tell Dunn I said thanks too, Tolle added, shaking Klein's hand like a politician on election day. Klein nodded. Will do. After that, Klein climbed the stairs and returned to the captain's office, probably hoping for some much-needed alone time. Done? Dunn asked, his mind clearly on lunch. Yep, Klein said, rubbing his forehead like a guy who just finished a brutal work shift. Turns out Deweyville's lead and porcelain factory is a total death trap. Over the years, too many workers died from lead poisoning. All those deaths left a trail of angry spirits. That doesn't sound too bad. Just some nightmares, right? Dunn, the seasoned pro, lit his pipe like it was another day at the office. Usually, yeah, Klein said. But Deweyville ran into a particularly angry worker who died on the street. She saw his family crest right before she croaked, and she wasn't happy. It wasn't until Deweyville gave her family 300 pounds in compensation that she finally chilled out. Societal problems, man. Steam age stuff. Workers are getting chewed up by machines and dying for pennies. Dunn muttered around his pipe. But enough of the doom and gloom. Tomorrow, let's hit up Old Will's restaurant to celebrate you making it to the big leagues. Sound good? Klein thought about it. Let's make it tomorrow. Captain, I'm wiped. I used spirit vision for way too long and did dream divination with those pissed-off ghosts. I need to crash this afternoon. Mind if I head home? Of course. You earned it. Dunn chuckled. Tomorrow night, then? I'll have Roseanne book us a table at Old Will's. Klein saluted, tipping his hat like a detective in a noir film. Thanks, Captain. Just as he was about to leave, Dunn raised an eyebrow. Did you say Deweyville paid 300 pounds to the girl's family? Yeah, Klein replied, already knowing where this was going. You're worried they'll get into trouble because they're suddenly rich? Dunn sighed. Seen it too many times. I'll get Kenley to help them skip town and start fresh somewhere else. Good call, Klein said, his tone serious. With that, Klein left the office, changed out of his police uniform, and headed home. Once back on Daffodil Street, Klein reheated last night's leftovers, scarfed them down with the last slice of bread, and crashed on his bed like a guy who just survived a zombie apocalypse. When he woke up, his pocket watch read 2:10 p.m. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting up the street outside where people in ragged clothes shuffled by. Phew, he exhaled slowly, shaking off his gloomy thoughts. One step at a time, just like his sequence. There was no rush. Things would work out. Shaking his head, Klein sat down at his desk and started reflecting on his past week's adventures, making mental notes so he wouldn't forget anything important. 5 minutes before 3, Klein found himself back above the fog, seated at the long bronze table. He tapped on the crimson stars that represented justice and the hanged man. Backlund, Empress Boro. Audrey lifted her dress as she quickly walked towards her bedroom. Suddenly, she felt something and looked sideways at the shadow sitting on the balcony. As expected, she saw her golden retriever, Susie, who was sitting there in silence, observing her as always. Audrey sighed and drew a crimson moon on her chest. She then got closer and looked down at her golden retriever from a commanding position. Susie, that's not right. This is peeping. A spectator has to observe in an open manner. The golden retriever lifted its head to look at its owner and shook its tail. After nagging her dog, Audrey didn't delay any further and continued walking towards her bedroom again. In the few seconds of opening and closing the door, she suddenly had a weird idea. I wonder if Mr. Fool would allow Susie to enter that mysterious space. Then there would be 4 members in the tarot gathering, and all of them would be Beyonders. No way, Susie can't talk. If they were to let her express her opinion and share her thoughts, what would she do? Woof, woof, woof? Howl, howl? Ew. Why am I mimicking a dog's bark here? Just imagining such a scene feels really strange. A mysterious and solemn gathering with the sudden barking of a dog. Mr. Fool would definitely kick us out of the tarot gathering directly. Audrey locked the door and sat by the side of her bed. She took out a piece of old yellowish-brown paper from underneath her pillow. She read it repeatedly and entered her spectator state. In a particular area of the Sonia Sea, an old sailboat which was in pursuit of the listener had already left the Rorstead archipelago. Seafarer Alger Wilson was worried that the wall clock's machinery would malfunction, so he entered the captain's cabin about half an hour earlier in case he had misjudged the time, which would cause his subordinates to see him getting pulled into the tarot gathering. In front of him was a glass of nearly transparent liquor. The rich aroma swirled strand after strand into his nostrils. Alger trembled once again when he thought of the impending gathering, the boundless fog that presented itself in front of him in the hotel's corridor, and the mysterious fool who sat in the middle of the gray fog. He lifted his glass and took a gulp, using the burning sensation in his throat to ease the emotions that had stirred within him. Very soon, he restored his calm. He was as calm and stoic as he always was. Chapter 9, New Diary page. Above the gray fog, gigantic stone columns held up a majestic divine hall. It looked like a place where gods have wine and cheese. But here, they're out of both. Rough. Two dark red blobs extended out into faint human figures by the side of the ancient mottled bronze table. Imagine showing up to a party like this without even a bottle of wine. Audrey's already disappointed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Augmented with a blurry effect like she's got bad Wi-Fi, Audrey greeted him with a bow and smiled. "It's unfortunate there's no wine here. Otherwise, we could have toasted to your successful trial." She was talking about the ritualistic magic. "But hey, any excuse for a drink, right?" "You are more powerful than we imagined," Alger Wilson added, clearly brown-nosing for some brownie points. Klein, surrounded by thick fog like a guy who has way too many secrets, pressed down with his right arm and replied with the casual tone of someone who just woke up from a nap. "Great. This means we're on the path of excellence. If something comes up and you can't make the Monday meetings, do the ritual and just tell me why. Swap the line, 'I pray for a good dream,' with the excuse. No need to say you were binge-watching shows." "All right," Audrey quickly agreed. "Mr. Fool, I got another page of Emperor Roselle's diary. I believe I still owe you one." "Yeah, nothing like settling a debt with ancient texts instead of cash." "I was away from land this week," Alger said with the seriousness of someone explaining why they couldn't reply to your texts, "so I haven't found any new pages." "No big deal. I wasn't expecting this to be a one-day shipping kind of request," Klein responded, leaning back like he owned the place. He turned to Miss Justice. "You can read the diary now." Audrey, ever the obedient student, bowed and began to write. As soon as she picked up the pen, symbols magically appeared on the goatskin parchment. Honestly, that would make taking notes in class so much easier. Klein raised his hand, and the parchment appeared in his palm. A true boss move. Without so much as a blink, Klein started reading, his expression as flat as a pancake in a no-carb zone. July 9th. I suddenly thought of an interesting question. Since the sequence pathways are also called the blessings of the divinities, or pathways of the divinities, then why would the stone slate that records the completed 22 sequence pathways be called the blasphemy slate? Blasphemy. What an interesting term. Just who is the one blasphemed? And who created the blasphemy slate? How could that person hold all of the sequence pathways? Just what other information was on the stone? I really want to see it. July 12th. I've realized another fact today. The sealed artifacts are an important component of a church's overall strength, even though some of the sealed items are very, very dangerous. Among the 7 churches, the god of craftsmanship wields the least number of sealed artifacts, which are also relatively less dangerous. Did I join an organization without a future? No. I should think of it this way. Only a blank piece of paper can produce a good painting. A weak organization is the best place for me to display my abilities. July 14th. I saw that mysterious Mr. Zaratul again. I never expected him to be the leader of an ancient organization, the Secret Order. Klein's pupils constricted when he read this. He nearly revealed an unnatural expression. The Zaratul family only had a certain connection with the Secret Order in the notes of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. But now, he learned from Emperor Roselle that the mysterious Mr. Zaratul was further determined to be the leader of the Secret Order. From the looks of it, It is an unquestionable fact that the secret order holds the seer sequence pathway. While Klein was reading the diary, Audrey looked over and began observing him out of habit. However, her field of vision was completely obscured by the thick fog. Momentarily taken aback, Audrey snapped back to her senses and turned her head frantically to look at the other illusory dark red star. I was too reckless, too insolent, too foolish in trying to observe Mr. Fool. I was lucky that he isn't angry. Audrey stuck out her tongue secretly and pretended to admire the scenery. She was just short of humming a lively tune. Alger sat silently, his gaze never leaving the long bronze table. He knew his place, as if he was in the presence of a true god. Klein collected himself and scanned the last portion of the diary. After learning that I had become a savant, Mr. Zaratul mentioned that I had chosen a difficult, yet relatively safe path. I asked him why that was the case, but all he did was smile before telling me that the sequence pathway contains secrets beyond my imagination. I couldn't help but ask him which sequence pathway he selected. He told me that his sequence 9 was seer. I intentionally mocked him and asked if every seer only disclosed half-truths, never explaining things more clearly. Furthermore, he was clearly a powerful high-sequence beyonder. There was no need for him to continue acting as a seer. Mr. Zaratul told me that it was a habit he adopted from back when he was a seer, and that this was a method that could pique my curiosity and make me cooperate with him. He hoped that I could help him steal a dangerous sealed item from the Church of the God of Craftsmanship, a relic of the Antigonus family. Clearly, this must wait until I become a core member of the Church of the God of Craftsmanship. I asked Mr. Zaratul how long it would take to digest the potion if I used the acting method, and what standards I should use to determine if I had digested it completely. He told me that for the lower sequences, it would only take half a year to digest the potion as long as one strictly used the acting method. In fact, in the fastest case, it might only take a month. And standard measure for progress was simple. Every Beyonder would sense it immediately once the potion was completely digested. It is what it is. I asked him for more details, but he merely smiled at me. To hell with his smiles, I'll beat up every seer I see when I become a high-sequence Beyonder. Rest in peace, Emperor. Klein read the diary several times before looking at Justice and the Hanged Man again. Sorry for the wait. It is our honor. Audrey was still shocked, forgetting that she was a spectator. She looked at the Hanged Man and organized her words. Where can I find the psychology alchemists? Psychology alchemists? Klein suddenly recalled the man buying supplementary ingredients for the spectator potion at the Tingen Underground Market. Perhaps he was a member of the psychology alchemists? Just as Klein was considering how to get closer to that man, the Hanged Man, Alger Wilson shook his head and said, Miss Justice, firstly, I don't have a clue. Secondly, I don't think there's any rush in seeking out the psychology alchemists. What you should focus on now is completely digesting the spectator potion. Audrey glanced at the fool and noticed that he didn't have any intention of adding to the conversation. She nodded in disappointment and said, All I want is to have plenty of time to prepare so that I can approach them more naturally. All right, then when can I digest the spectator potion and stop acting? Is there a standard that indicates when I can? I'm almost at the point where I no longer feel frustrated, nor do I hear the constant murmuring anymore. Alger looked at the fool in the fog, but saw that he didn't have any intention of speaking. He then deliberated before saying, If you don't use the acting method, the typical rule of thumb is to wait 3 years and confirm that you no longer feel restless or receive any auditory or visual illusions. There is one simple test to determine when you can. That method is to exhaust your body to its limit. If you still don't hear any maniacal murmurings or see any strange things at that point, that would mean that you're ready to advance. With regards to the acting method, I have also just come into contact with it. It feels good, so I don't think it'll take 3 years. That wasn't useful at all. 3 years? That's too long. Audrey criticized inwardly. She had just thought about this when she heard an armrest being tapped. Audrey froze, then turned her head in joy. She saw the fool tapping on the edge of the long table. Alger sat straighter, waiting for the fool to speak. Klein said in his normal tone. For low sequence beyonders, as long as you strictly stick to acting, you should be able to digest the medicine in half a year. It's even possible to do it in a month. He looked at Justice and added, as for the signs of digestion, you'll know it when it comes. It doesn't need to be taught. 1 month. Great. Thank you, Mr. Fool, Audrey exclaimed while brimming with joy. Miss Justice, don't think that you are the chosen one. The key point is half a year. Klein lifted his right hand and placed it beside his lips. Half a year, Alger repeated softly. Audrey sensed joy, relief, and intense doubt in his tone. What is he suspicious about? Audrey thought as she asked, Mr. Fool, have you considered adding more members? Klein leaned back casually. He had long prepared an answer. This started as a trial, so I didn't spend much time thinking about extending our meetings. But now, as a regular gathering, we must choose our members carefully. Secrecy is our motto. Audrey nodded gently and said, that is to say that we have to follow a process of observation, recommendation, and testing process. Yes, a process. You can interpret it that way, Klein affirmed. Chapter 94. Hidden Sage. The Fallen Creator, Fallen. Alger ruminated over the fool's words and fell deep in thought. However, what struck Alger the most was the fool's relaxed, natural, and nonchalant attitude. He acted as if they were equal. If he hadn't experienced their previous ritual, Alger might have thought the fool was merely bluffing, trying to puff himself up like a rooster on a fence post. But now, he was of the opinion that even if the fool was inferior to the true creator, he was at least close to that level. It's dangerous. It's also an opportunity. Alger muttered softly. He then spoke with a smile. Mr. Fool, your description is indeed more appropriate. According to our observations, beyonders who believed in the true creator, no, the fallen creator, have a higher probability of losing control. The rest of them are mostly psychopaths. That's something that the Nighthawk's intelligence mentioned as well. And the so-called psychopaths didn't lose their sanity. Instead, their ideologies became twisted. Klein maintained his seated posture, but didn't continue with the conversation. He was still considering how to inquire about the secret order and clown potion, but he couldn't figure out a way of asking the questions that fit with his persona. It's such a pity that the gathering is still so different from an internet forum. Otherwise, I could create another Smurf account to join the gathering, and that account would be in charge of asking questions that are inconvenient for me to ask. Maybe one day, I'll learn mirror-related magic and give it a try. For example, I can make half the members here my Smurf accounts. There are 22 chairs here, and there are 22 cards in the tarot deck. That matches up perfectly. But when I created this divine hall, I didn't even name myself the Fool or have any intention of forming a tarot club. Do these symbolize the 22 different sequence pathways? I wanted a divine hall, so a divine hall appeared. If I wanted a Smurf account, would I get a Smurf account? Upon seeing the Fool remain silently engulfed in the thick gray fog, Audrey asked both wistfully and curiously, that sounds scary. Mr. Hanged Man, could you share, in detail, information about each and every mysterious organization, and also the matters regarding each secret cult? It's hard for me to come into contact with them during my daily life. I can only understand them through the both of you. I'm willing to pay for it. May I know what you'd like in return? That's a great question. Miss Justice, you're playing the role of my Smurf account to a certain extent. This way, the Hanged Man will definitely bring up the secret order. You're the best! Klein's mind stirred when he heard that, but he didn't let his emotions show through his expression or movements. Alger thought for a moment before saying, I need money. 1,000 pounds. It'd be best if they weren't bills marked by a serial number, or maybe gemstones that have just been unearthed. Price them according to the Backlund Jewelry Exchange's monthly average price. 1,000 pounds? That's a huge sum of money. It could buy a house in a high-class street in Tingen City. Not everyone would have that available immediately. Captain might have an annual salary like that, I guess? Haley's death compensation was only 300 pounds. Although Miss Justice is a noble, she obviously hasn't inherited her family's wealth yet, and she'll only be receiving some sort of annual allowance. It's no wonder that the Hanged Man stated that it could be paid via gemstones. Klein was very sensitive towards monetary figures. Luckily, he was blanketed in thick fog. For a single lady or madam, 2,000 pounds could let her live a decent life. If 2,000 pounds were invested, the investment could reliably produce an annual return of about 100 pounds. 1,000 pounds? Audrey said, sounding shocked. She then replied happily, "No problem. Do I send it to the previous address?" Judging by Miss Justice's tone, she finds it very cheap. Klein didn't look over. Alger was quiet for a good 20 seconds before he said, "Yes, send it to the Warrior and Sea Bar at Pelican Street in the White Rose borough of Pritz Harbor. Tell the boss, Williams, that it's what the captain wants." "All right." Audrey leaned back and posed in a spectator-like manner. "Mr. Hanged Man, you can start now." Alger looked at the fool, deliberated for a moment before saying slowly, "Let's start from the Moses Ascetic Order. It is the earliest hidden organization. Of course, many think that the earliest hidden organizations are the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the Church of Mother Earth, and the Church of the God of Combat. These people must be from the Church of Lord of Storms, the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom." Audrey refuted sulkily. "The Church of the Goddess is the earliest hidden organization?" That was the first time Klein had heard of such a claim. What exactly happened in the fourth epoch or the third epoch? Alger smiled and said, "The truth is buried in ancient history. Only one thing is certain. No one has ever said that the Church of Lord of Storms, the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom were once hidden organizations." All right, let's save some time and return to the main topic. The Moses Ascetic Order was first established by a few humans that had read the blasphemy slate. They believed in a non-anthropomorphic god called the Hidden Sage. The description is that of a god, but it is more of an ideology, a natural law. For example, all objects are numeric. The Hidden Sage is an embodiment of spirit numerology, or that knowledge is supreme, and the Hidden Sage is knowledge itself. Hence, the original Moses Ascetic Order was a very respectable organization, and it maintained a good relationship with the other major churches. The members of the organization led ascetic lives to resist losing control and to resolve the effects of the remnant potion. They strictly kept their order's secrets, and they upheld moral and religious precepts. They believed that humans continuously reincarnate after death. The sequence 9 that they grasp is called Mystery Prior. The word warlock was also spread from that organization. Audrey listened to the Hanged Man's description carefully and asked sharply, "You said that the Moses Ascetic Order used to be a respectable organization. Are they not one anymore?" Alger nodded his head indiscernibly. "Yes, they have fallen into corruption and are now an evil organization." "Why? I find their beliefs very good and very normal," Audrey expressed her confusion. That was Klein's confusion too. The information that he could get at his security clearance didn't provide the reason for the Moses Ascetic Order's fall from grace. Alger looked at the unfathomable fool and tersely agreed. "I am not sure of the real reason. It might be because it has been buried by history. However, I have heard one terrifying explanation. In that story, the main reason why the Moses Ascetic Order fell into corruption was that the god they believed in, the Hidden Sage, had come to life. He became the personification of an evil god. Came to life? How?" Audrey found it unimaginable as she replied with an incredulous tone. Without realizing it, she had exited from her spectator state. It's like a horror story, but the ghost is even a god. Klein's heart stirred with a surge of emotions as well. "I'm sorry, no one knows the answer." Alger had originally wanted to casually say, maybe Mr. Fool would know, but he held back the urge. Wow, he had already teetered on the borders of danger once. In the Book of Storms 5 verse 7, there was a saying that Alger remembered clearly. "Do not test God." Audrey calmed herself down and didn't press for more answers. She gestured for him to continue. Klein maintained his seated posture and his silence, validating the Hanged Man's descriptions with his own understanding. Finally, he realized that there were 4 points that he needed to take note of. First, the Demoness sect was also known as the Demoness family in the fourth epoch. Back then, they had very few members, and their beliefs were passed down through their bloodlines. Plus, they would kill the fathers of their children and abandon the baby boys. Hence, all the members were female. Of course, That was all from Alger's description, and there was no way to verify it at the moment. Second, the numinous episcopate that believed in death and the Rose School of Thought that liked bloody sacrificial worship ceremonies both originated in the southern continent. After the colonial era came, they almost vanished under attacks by the seven churches. But as such, they began spreading to the northern continent. Third, the current psychology alchemists were similar to the earlier Moses ascetic order. They believed in a non-anthropomorphic existence and that the human spirit could change everything. Fourth, the secret order had the lowest activity level among all the other hidden organizations. Thus, they were the most unknown. Every time they appeared, they seemed to be after something or looking for something. What are they after or looking for? Klein suddenly recalled the diary he had read earlier. The leader of the secret order, Zaratul, cooperated with Roselle. His goal was to get something left behind by the Antigonus family. Their appearance that time was to look for the lost notebook, the Antigonus family notebook. Klein narrowed his eyes slightly and felt that he had apparently found the key reason for the secret order's actions. They are after the things that the Antigonus family left behind. Klein suppressed his urge to tap the edge of the table as his thoughts appeared one after another. Oh, they were looking for the remnant traces the Antigonus family left behind? Then, must I direct my focus onto these areas to obtain the clown potion formula from the secret order? After a further exchange of information, Klein announced the end of the gathering. By your will. Audrey and Alger stood up together. Cutting off the connections, he saw both their figures shatter and disappear. Klein rubbed his glabella and attempted conjuring a Smurf account with his mind. As he thought, a figure appeared at the furthest end of the long bronze table. That figure was wearing a black tuxedo, a silk top hat, and a dull expression. His actions were clumsy and inarticulate. Even though he was engulfed in gray fog, it was obvious that something was wrong with him. That won't do. Klein experimented a few more times before sighing and dismissing the idea of creating a Smurf account. He attempted other things too. He continued to sit above the gray fog in the seat of honor at the long bronze table. He considered what Audrey had said, and he cast his gaze curiously at the illusory crimson stars. After a moment of silence, Klein started to pray as a form of feedback instead of establishing contact with those stars. Amidst the tranquility and silence, he didn't receive any feedback from the 10+ crimson stars nearby. In order to receive feedback, I need to pull someone above the gray fog before I can reply? Klein nodded as he thought, feeling somewhat disappointed. He didn't want to violate someone else's will and forcefully pull them into this mysterious space. Klein was just getting ready to leave, but he habitually touched a nearby illusory crimson star. Just then, he suddenly felt that there was a faint and insignificant prayer deep inside the crimson star. Chapter 95, The Supplicant. A prayer? Klein's mind stirred as he used the same method he had back when he spied on the hanged man. He allowed his spirituality to spread out and touch the crimson blob, almost like when you try to grab the last nacho in a crowded bar without anyone noticing. A hazy, contorted image appeared. He could faintly make out a blonde teen kneeling before a crystal ball. Yeah, like some dark arts Harry Potter type of situation, but way creepier. The guy was dressed in a tight-fitting black outfit, rocking a style that screamed, "I'm edgy, but also a little uncomfortable." The area around the teen was pitch dark, and the furniture looked old enough to qualify for a museum exhibit. Random bursts of light would illuminate the place now and then, but strangely, no thunder or rain sounds followed. Spooky AF. The teen had his hands pressed against his forehead, fingers interlaced, muttering some intense prayers. His thick accent buzzed annoyingly in Klein's ears. Klein tried to focus, squinting like he was back in school trying to ace an English comprehension test. But after a few minutes, the harsh reality hit him. He couldn't understand Jack. For a guy who's supposed to be the mysterious ruler of this world above the gray fog, not understanding a damn thing is kinda humiliating, Klein thought, giving himself a chuckle. Determined not to lose face, even though there was no one around to witness his failure, he gave the prayer another go. As he listened intently, Klein made a realization. While he couldn't fully understand the language, It had similarities to ancient Fasak, the ancient language that felt like Old English met its match in a bar fight with Latin. Father, mother. Those words, maybe? Klein thought. It was close to ancient Fasak, but with enough differences to make him feel like he'd walked into the wrong classroom. He scratched his head. Ancient Fasak, huh? Could this be one of those forgotten dialects or some secret language only spoken at crazy cult meetups? Klein's eyes narrowed. It reminded him of the Antigonus family's diary. Then again, ancient Fasak didn't just come out of nowhere. It evolved from Jotun, the language of giants. And considering the Fasak Empire claimed some connection to giants, maybe this dude was muttering in ancient Jotun. Man, I need a language app for this. Something like Duolingo, but for ancient cult stuff. Klein thought, knowing full well his knowledge was running out faster than his patience. He retracted his spirituality, deciding he wasn't about to summon a praying teen into his space without knowing what the heck the kid was on about. Phew. Klein let out a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, like he'd just dodged an awkward conversation at a family dinner. After revising Roselle's diary, Klein suited up and left for the divination club. Despite getting a nice pay bump, he wasn't out here living like a king. He still took public transport, although he did indulge a bit, spending a whole 1.5 pence on sweet iced tea because, well, it was hot and hydration matters. When he reached House Street, Klein threw his empty cup into the trash like a gentleman and strolled up to the second floor. Pinching his glabella, Klein activated his spirit vision, just in case. The second he stepped into the hall, a wave of sadness washed over him. It wasn't the Monday blues. No, this was something more real. Angelica, the pretty receptionist, sat there with slightly red eyes. Her expression screamed, "I'm here physically, but mentally I'm checked out." "The grief will pass in time," Klein said softly, giving her a reassuring nod that said, "Hey, I've seen some stuff, and this too shall pass." Angelica looked up in confusion. "Mr. Moretti, how did you?" "Oh, right. You're an exceptional fortune teller." She quickly remembered his reputation. Klein sighed in response, playing the wise mystic card to perfection. "I only caught a rough idea. What exactly happened to Mr. Vincent?" Angelica's lip trembled. The boss said, "Mr. Vincent passed in his sleep, a heart attack. He was so young, so kind." She wiped away tears, her voice cracking. Klein gave a somber nod. "I'm sorry for bringing it up." With that, he moved toward the meeting room, giving Angelica space to collect herself. The room was sparse, with only 5 or 6 members present. Klein's spirit vision scanned the room like a detective in a noir film. Some were sad, others indifferent, and a few were totally unaffected. In other words, normal people doing normal things. Just as he was about to turn off his spirit vision, Angelica walked over with a hushed whisper. "Mr. Moretti, that guy from last time, he's here again." Klein smirked. "You remember him?" "Well, he was the only guy crazy enough to wait an entire afternoon for a divination," Angelica replied with a small smile. Klein grabbed his cane and stepped outside. There, he found Bogda, the man he'd advised a few days ago. His liver aura, which had been in serious trouble before, now looked healthier than a gym bro after leg day. "Congratulations," Klein greeted. "Nothing feels better than being in good health." Bogda beamed and practically crushed Klein's hand in a shake. "Mr. Moretti, you were right. The doctors couldn't believe it, but I've fully recovered." He went on, describing how the doctors were completely baffled by his miraculous recovery. Klein, on the other hand, was thinking one thing. That apothecary is definitely a beyonder. Herbs and modern medicine don't fix liver disease overnight unless someone's mixing in a little magic. Then, Bogda said something that made Klein's eyebrow twitch. "Those 10 pounds were money well spent," Bogda said, clearly talking about the apothecary's medicine. Klein blinked. 10 pounds? 10 pounds? And you gave me 8 pence for my divination? His inner monologue was screaming, but his face remained cool as a cucumber. Bogda left after a lengthy conversation. Klein remained in the same spot, dumbfounded at what he had just heard. After a bit of thought, he decided to check out Vlad Street himself. But when he reached the herb store, Klein found the door locked with a forced subletting sign hanging in the window. "Man's probably vanished faster than my patience," Klein muttered, giving up the investigation. "Man's probably hanging faster than my sanity," Klein muttered silently. Since this had happened, he no longer had to be troubled or perform any observations. Chapter 96, Daly's Guess. By the afternoon of the next day, Klein had fully recovered from any signs of exhaustion. He strutted into the Blackthorn Security Company like he owned the place, ready to tackle whatever weirdness awaited him. "Good morning, Klein. The weather is so cool and beautiful today. I'm totally pumped for tonight's feast." Roseanne chirped from behind the reception desk, her light green dress fluttering like she just stepped out of a magazine. Klein dramatically placed a hand on his stomach, grinning. "Miss Roseanne, you shouldn't be talking about food so early in the morning. I'm already sick of today's mission that hasn't even shown up yet. I just hope the evening arrives sooner, like faster than a kid on Halloween." "Me too," Roseanne chuckled, a mischievous glint in her eye. She looked left and right like a spy, then beckoned Klein to come closer. Leaning in conspiratorially, she said, "I met Madame Daly earlier." "Spirit medium, Madame Daly?" Klein raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. The most famous spirit medium from Awa County had been chilling at Enmat Harbor all this time, which was no easy trek from Tingen. "Yup," Roseanne nodded emphatically. "But she's already bounced. Ah, she's my ultimate Beyonder crush. If I were to become a spirit medium, I'd ditch Tingen and globetrot like a boss. Intis, Faisak, Fainapotter, the southern continent, bringing the party to the vast prairies, primitive forests, and snow-covered plains. Just me and my spirit pals, living it up." "Lady, just remember the Nighthawk's rules." Klein shook his head in amusement. "Even Madame Daly has to apply and get permission to leave Enmat Harbor." "I know that. But come on, don't ruin my dreams." Roseanne huffed, feigning annoyance. "The truth is, I'd never become a Beyonder. Too risky. I'd probably bite the dust from some random gunfire. From what I've seen, Beyonders are basically folks who turn themselves into monsters to fight other monsters. Talk about a job hazard." "Archbishop Chanis said we're guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches constantly battling threats and madness," Klein replied, sighing. That quote had hit hard. To fight against the abyss, we have to endure the corruption of the abyss. They both fell silent for a moment, contemplating the weight of that truth. Roseanne broke the tension first, pursing her lips toward the partition and saying, "The captain wanted to see you when you arrived." "All right." With his hat and cane in hand like a dapper gentleman, Klein strutted through the partition and knocked on Dunn's office door. A middle-aged dude with deep, serene gray eyes and a high hairline put down his coffee cup, smiling warmly. Daly was here. "Can't say I'm surprised. Roseanne just filled me in," Klein replied, matching his smile. Dunn didn't mind the banter but sighed. Daly was just transferred to the Backlund Diocese, the busiest, most crowded city in the world. It's packed with Beyonders and opportunities galore. She's way more likely to become an archbishop or a senior deacon before I even finish this cup of coffee. "Why's that?" Klein asked, genuinely curious as he took a seat. Dunn thought for nearly 20 seconds, his face serious. "She has a unique talent for mastering and exploiting sequence potions. Remember the internal rule of the Nighthawks? If you want to consume the next potion in the sequence, you've got to wait 3 years and pass a strict examination to avoid losing control. But honestly, 3 years usually isn't enough. It took me 3 years to go from sleepless to midnight poet, and a whopping 9 years to go from midnight poet to nightmare. Like, where's the fast track? Now I've spent 3 years just to hit sequence 6. Who knows how many more I'll need? When we age in our energy dips, trying to advance further is a huge risk. Losing control at that stage? Not worth it," he continued. "As for Daly and me, we're different from most Beyonders. After she became a corpse collector, she handed in a special application after only a year, wanting to drink the follow-up potion immediately. Surprisingly, she passed the stricter examination and snagged the Gravedigger potion. It only took her 1 more year to go from Gravedigger to Spirit Medium. This year will mark her 5th year as a Beyonder, and she's only 24. Plenty of time to conquer the world. On the surface, she's the most famous spirit medium in Awa County, but she's basically putting on an act. Old Neil had mentioned that Madame Daly had similar tendencies. Klein felt like he'd stumbled upon the key reason for Madame Daly's rapid rise. "Captain, you're still young too. You're only in your 30s. Klein attempted to comfort Dunn, but added in his head, "It's just that your memory isn't what it used to be." Dunn took a sip of his coffee, shaking his head with a bitter smile. Why didn't you ask Madame Daly how she masters and exploits sequence potions? Klein nudged. Come on, spill the tea. Dunn put down his cup and rubbed his temples. She told me to become a true nightmare. I have no clue what that means. Play the role of a nightmare? Man, that sounds sinister. Klein furrowed his brow, momentarily lost in thought. Then Dunn took out his smoking pipe, sniffing at it like a connoisseur. Daly and I discussed the possibility of Sears' follow-up potion being clown. Assuming that Sears' member didn't lie to you, she brought up an interesting hypothesis. What hypothesis? Klein leaned in, intrigued. He had once used a divination method to determine if clown was indeed the follow-up potion for Sear. The answer had been vague, but now it felt like he was getting closer to a confirmation. Dunn's deep, serene gray eyes scanned Klein as he mused. A normal sequence pathway progresses in a stepped manner. They advance based on certain similarities. For instance, Sleepless Midnight Poet and Nightmare all relate to the darkness of night, peaceful sleep, and the tranquility that comes from hitting the sack. You can imagine that every subsequent sequence has identical traits, just with more power and a wider scope. They could be linked to secrets, disaster, horror, the crimson moon, etc. Certain sequence pathways might look unrelated, but when we analyze them, we can find some common threads, like assassin and instigator. They both bring calamities, pain, but in recent centuries, Beyonders are few in number, and each church has listed sequence 7 as a mid-sequence. Dunn laughed in a self-deprecating manner. Sequence 9 and sequence 8 are low sequences. Then, sequences 7 through 5 are mid-sequences. Finally, those sequence 4 and above are high sequences. Klein repeated in his head and inevitably felt a yearning for that. Emperor Roselle was a high sequence Beyonder. However, the higher the sequence, the greater the risk of losing control. Klein thought to himself in fear. He asked, as though in a seemingly casual manner, what is the sequence 4 potion for the Church of the Goddess called? In actual fact, I'm not sure. My security clearance isn't high enough for me to be privy to that information. I'll be able to read them when I become a diocese bishop or Nighthawk's deacon. Dunn shook his head and smiled. In fact, at least half of the church's 13 archbishops and 9 senior deacons at the top of the church's hierarchy are below sequence 4. That's just me being optimistic. The Archbishop Ince Zangwill, who became wanted, lost control when he tried to advance to sequence 4. The one who stole sealed artifact 008? His potion was apparently called Gatekeeper. Klein thought and probed. Is Sleepless Sequence 5 Gatekeeper? No, that's in Spirit Medium's pathway. You'll be allowed to access that information when you reach Sequence 7 and become a bishop or a captain of a Nighthawks team. Gatekeeper is Sequence 5 of the Spirit Medium pathway? Does it mean that it's keeping watch over the gates to hell? Or keeping watch over the gates to the spirit world? Klein guessed, go to Old Neil and continue with your studies. Dunn smiled and said, don't forget about dinner tonight at Old Will's restaurant. Reservations have been made. I'll introduce you to the rest of the Nighthawks officially. All right, I've already prepared the money. Klein forced a smile. No, there's no need. Have you forgotten that we have additional bonuses? The part about you completing an assigned mission. Dunn waved. Klein was momentarily taken aback before replying with a beaming smile. All right, Captain. He turned around and walked towards the door, while counting inwardly. 3, 2, 1. Why didn't Captain call me back? Klein dragged out 1 for a very long time, only to be surprised that Captain Dunn Smith hadn't added anything. A miracle. In the armory, Old Neil stole a glance at Klein, who was in a good mood. Don't be obsessed with tonight's dinner. You still have a lot of things to learn, such as more ritualistic magic, ancient Hermes, dragonish, elvish, and many more. Yeah, every afternoon besides your day off, you have to have at least 2 hours of combat training with an instructor. Combat training? Captain didn't mention it? Klein was shocked. Old Neil nodded and didn't hesitate to answer. He forgot. Chapter 97, Combat Teacher. At 2 in the afternoon, outside a shabby 2-storied building looked like it had seen better days. Like back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Klein, dressed in his probationary inspector uniform, surveyed the weed-infested garden and the vines that had decided to claim the walls as their own. He turned his head in surprise. My combat instructor lives here? Did I step into a horror movie or something? I mean, shouldn't a combat artist chosen by the Nighthawks be living in a badass fortress or something? Leonard Mitchell, who had guided Klein there, snickered and said, "Don't underestimate Mr. Gawain because of his residence. Sure, he may not have an aristocratic title, but this guy was a true knight back in the day, more like a chivalrous warrior than a couch potato." Having said that, the poetic Nighthawk, dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and buttonless leather boots, suddenly felt melancholic. Maybe he missed the good old days when knights charged into battle like they were auditioning for a medieval action movie. He was active during the waning era of the knights. Picture this: warriors in shiny armor charging through enemy lines, dodging bullets like they were in an action flick. But then, boom, high-pressure steam guns and six-barrel machine guns crashed the party. Talk about a plot twist. The knights had to gradually step down, and let's just say they weren't exactly pleased. Mr. Gawain met the same fate. More than 20 years ago, the Awa Knights Order of Chivalry faced the most advanced weaponry from the Intiz Republic Army. Sigh, every time I recall this, it's like I'm dusting off ancient history. The poet in me stirs, but alas, I can't write worth a damn. Then what's the point in saying all this? Klein decided to ignore Leonard's poetic ramblings and suggested seriously, "My university buddy once said that writing poetry requires talent. You might want to read the classical poems anthology of the Lowen Kingdom." Leonard's mood did a 180. He replied, his tone light. "I bought that ages ago, along with selected poems of Emperor Roselle. I'm working hard to become a true midnight poet, Mr. Sear. Just call me the Shakespeare of our time, minus the tragic endings." Is he hinting at some weird acting method? Klein pretended not to understand him. "You might also need a grammar book or two, buddy." "All right, let's enter." Leonard pushed open the half-closed metallic gates, and they followed the path toward the house. Before they even reached the door, a tall man emerged, looking like he had just crawled out of a history book. He had short blonde hair with a sprinkling of white, and his face bore the weight of years like he'd been in a boxing match with time itself. "What are you doing here?" the aged man asked in a deep, gravelly voice that could probably scare small children. "Mr. Gawain, according to your contract with the police department, this probationary inspector will be learning the art of combat under your guidance," Leonard explained with a grin, probably hoping for a medal for bravery. "Combat? In this era? You're kidding me, right?" Gawain looked at Klein with eyes that had seen too much and said in a voice that was as exciting as watching paint dry, "You should learn how to draw your gun and shoot. Master the fancy toys, not the old school fighting." Was this guy still traumatized by those six-barrel machine guns? Klein chose to keep his mouth shut and smiled at Leonard. The art of combat is still a skill every cop should master. Most criminals we face aren't exactly on a death wish. Some don't even carry weapons. In those cases, we need to know how to handle ourselves, Leonard said, clearly prepared for this argument. With a dark expression, Gawain fell silent for more than 10 seconds before saying, "Throw a punch." He was looking right at Klein. Klein, who was currently unarmed, remembered the boxing matches he had watched back in the day. He raised his arm and threw a punch that probably looked more like a spasm than anything else. Gawain's lips twitched slightly, probably holding back a laugh. He thought for a moment and said, "Kick." Klein tilted slightly and twisted his hips, tightening his thigh muscles before kicking forward with his right foot. Cough. Gawain cleared his throat, trying to mask his amusement. He glanced at Leonard and said, "I'll honor my contract. But based on his foundation, he needs to come here 4 times a week for 3 hours each time for the first month. Good luck, kid." "You're the combat expert. It's your call," Leonard said without missing a beat. He smiled at Klein. "See you at dinner, champ." After Leonard left, Klein asked out of curiosity, "Instructor, how should I start practicing? Punching, or footwork, or maybe a little interpretive dance?" As a proud keyboard warrior, he knew footwork was crucial in combat, but he was feeling a bit sarcastic today. Gawain stood akimbo and shook his head lethargically, looking like he could use a nap. "What you need now is strength training, kid." "See those? Those are 2 dumbbells made of steel. Welcome to your new best friends. Other than that, you also have to practice deep squats, running, and rope skipping, 1 set at a time. Don't worry, It'll be fun, like a party, but without the snacks. While Klein was still in a daze, Gawain suddenly raised his voice and said sternly, "Understood? Understood." At this moment, Klein felt like he had returned to military training, facing an instructor straight out of a horror movie. "Change out of your clothes. There's a set of knight's training clothes on the sofa." Gawain sighed dramatically, as if he were a Shakespearean actor. He turned around and marched toward the black steel dumbbells, leaving Klein to figure out how to peel off his clothes without losing his dignity. 6 in the evening, at a corner table of the Old Will restaurant. Other than Fry, who was guarding Chanis Gate, all the members of the Blackthorn Security Company were present. 6 Nighthawks and 5 civilian staff. A white tablecloth was draped over the long table, making it look fancy. Waiters scurried around, delivering plates of food like they were running a race. Klein's eyes widened at the sight of steaks drenched in black pepper sauce. He saw bacon, sausages paired with mashed potatoes, egg puddings, asparagus, and specialty cheeses, even rose-colored champagne. However, he had no appetite. The training earlier had nearly made him want to vomit. Talk about a mood killer. Noticing the pale, newly inducted Nighthawk, Dunn raised the glass of red wine in front of him and laughed. "Let us welcome our newest official member, Klein Moretti. Cheers. May your journey be filled with less pain and more food." The cold and introverted black-haired lady, Royale Rydeen, the sleepless Kenley White, the sloppy Leonard Mitchell, and the white-haired, black-eyed midnight poet Sikatron all raised their cups and looked at the new member of their team like he was a rare Pokemon. Klein fought back the discomfort from training and raised his glass of amber champagne. He stood and said, "Thank you." He clinked glasses with every Nighthawk, tilted his head back, and downed the small amount of champagne like he was trying to impress someone. "Is our Miss Author not going to say something on this occasion?" Dunn smiled as he looked at Sikatron, the woman of few words. Sikatron was a lady in her 30s. She wasn't winning any beauty contests, but had this unique vibe, quiet and serene, like someone who would secretly win a staring contest with a statue. Klein had heard old Neil mention that this midnight poet moonlighted as an author, attempting to submit her works to newspapers and magazines. Unfortunately, only a few smaller newspapers had accepted them, like getting ghosted after a date. Sika smiled and looked at Dunn. "In order to make the term Miss Author a reality, Captain, I think you should give me some funds to self-publish my work. Support local talent and all that." Dunn chuckled. "You should take notes from old Neil and give me a better reason than that." "I'm most impressed with Mr. Neil in this department." Roseanne chimed in, her mouth full of roast mutton. "Probably not the best time to talk about authorship, but hey, multitasking." Amidst the chatter and laughter, Leonard turned to Klein and asked, "Are you so tired that you have no appetite to eat? Or did you accidentally swallow your own foot?" "Yeah," Klein sighed, trying to hide his inner drama. "If you haven't touched your food yet, I can be of assistance. I can eat enough for an army." Klein didn't mind. He nodded. That wouldn't be an issue. And with that, Leonard demolished a good portion of the food in front of him like a pro. As dinner progressed, the waiters served plates of beef pudding and ice cream. Klein tasted the ice cream and found it cold and sweet. It was particularly appetizing. Before he realized it, he had finished the ice cream drizzled with blueberry sauce. As a result of this, he started to feel the hunger pangs, a hunger that demanded recharging food after intense exertion. Swallowing his saliva, Klein looked to the front, only to see that all the plates were empty. There were no leftovers. "Let's end the dinner here and give Klein a final toast," Dunn suggested. Before finishing his sentence, Klein asked, "Captain, may I order another plate of food?" The group fell silent after hearing such a request, only to break out into chuckles moments later. "Haha, you finally recovered. No problem. Order 2 plates if you want to." Dunn shook his head and laughed. While patiently waiting an unbearable amount of time, Klein heard his stomach growling. Finally, a freshly prepared black pepper steak was served before him. His fork and knife danced as Klein finished the medium-done steak in 90 seconds, tears nearly falling from his eyes. The meat juices and the fragrance of the sauce lingered in his mouth. Sometime later, Klein let out a satisfied sigh as he looked at his empty plate. He put down his knife and fork and took a sip of his champagne. "Waiter, "The bill, please." Dunn turned around and called for the waiter. The waiter went to the counter, then returned with the check. He gave a thorough breakdown. You opened 5 bottles of Desi champagne, each bottle being 12 soli and 3 pence, a small glass of Southville red wine for 10 pence. Each black pepper beef steak was 1 soli 2 pence. Each serving of beef pudding was 6 pence. The servings of ice cream was 1 soli each. The total would be 5 pounds, 9 soli and 6 pence. 5 pounds, 9 soli and 6 pence? That's nearly my weekly salary. A restaurant is indeed much more expensive than eating at home. Klein clicked his tongue upon hearing that. He felt lucky that the captain had said he didn't need to pay out of his own pocket. They had some petty cash from bonus earnings. He calculated the cost carefully and noticed that the most expensive portion of the meal was the alcohol. 5 bottles of champagne had cost more than 3 pounds. This is no different from Earth. Klein secretly rubbed his stomach and forced down the last of his champagne. The next morning, Klein felt bloated. He tried to get off the bed in his sleepy stupor. Just as he exerted strength, he was instantly awakened by his aching muscles. He felt as though his body wasn't under his control. What a familiar feeling. It's the same as that day after we got punished with frog jumps. Today is a rest day, but I still have to pay a visit to my mentor and see if I can borrow the monograph on the Hornassus main peak from the library at the university. Klein's lips twitched as he made his way outside with some effort. He wanted to draw a gasp with every step. "Klein, what happened to you?" Melissa, who had just come out of the bathroom, sized up her brother suspiciously for his odd posture and slow movement. Chapter 98. Mr. Azik. Faced with his sister's question, all Klein could do was reply with a regretful smile. Sore muscles. He originally believed that by consuming the sequence potion, his constitution would be enhanced as a beyonder, but the harsh reality told him that a seer's stats points were all allocated to his spirituality, mind, intuition, and interpretation. It didn't help him bounce back from combat training any faster. Guess the potion wasn't like a pre-workout, huh? As for the original Klein, he had focused on his studies early on and had suffered from malnutrition. That led him to possess a below-average physical condition. So yeah, having after effects from working out was practically a badge of honor at this point. Sore muscles? I remember you returning after dinner last night, and you didn't do anything else. Does alcohol cause sore muscles? Melissa inquired with an inquisitive look. Does alcohol cause sore muscles? Sis, that question can't help but make me have inappropriate thoughts. Klein laughed dryly and said, "No, this has nothing to do with alcohol. It was from yesterday afternoon. I joined the company's combat training." Combat? Melissa was even more astonished. Klein organized his thoughts and said, "Well, this is what happened. I considered it and believed that as a historical and relic consultant of a security company, it's impossible for me to stay in the office or port warehouse forever. Perhaps there will come a day when I have to accompany them to the villages or an ancient castle, to the site of some relic. That might require me to hike, cross rivers, and walk a lot. I'll have to endure all sorts of tests posed by nature, so I have to possess a sufficiently healthy body." So you joined combat training to enhance your stamina? Melissa seemed to understand her brother's intention. "That's right," Klein answered with great affirmation. Melissa frowned. "But that isn't gentlemanly. Don't you always keep yourself to the standards of a professor? A professor only requires the ability to read historical documents, ponder over difficult questions, and maintain a polite and gentlemanly demeanor. Of course, I'm not saying that those aren't all good things. I prefer men who can solve problems on their own, regardless of whether that solution requires brawn or brain." Klein smiled. No, Melissa. Your definition of a professor contains a misconception. A true professor can communicate with people gently and politely, but he can also educate the other person using the principles of physics by raising a cane to convince someone when there's an obstacle in communication. Principles of physics. Melissa was momentarily at a loss, but she quickly understood what her brother was saying. She was suddenly unable to retort him. Klein didn't say anything more, but widened his pace with great difficulty as he headed for the bathroom. Melissa stood there and looked for a few seconds. She suddenly shook her head and caught up to Klein. "Do you need my help?" She posed as if she was supporting someone. No, there's no need to. I was hamming it up a bit earlier. Klein felt humiliated. He suddenly stood straight and walked normally. Watching her brother walk steadily to the washroom and close the door, Melissa pursed her lips and muttered, Klein is getting more and more pretentious. I even believed that his muscle soreness was really that serious. In the bathroom, Klein stood behind the tightly shut door, his face suddenly contorting in pain. Ouch, ouch, ouch. He held his breath, tensed his body, and stood there for a good 7 or 8 seconds. When he finally went downstairs with great effort, had breakfast, and saw Benson and Melissa off, his soreness finally began to ease. After resting for a little while, Klein took his cane, donned his top hat, and left the house, strolling towards the public carriage stop. During the summer, Koy University had trees with shade-providing foliage, flourishing with birds and luxuriant flowers. It was peaceful and calm. Walking along the river, Klein took a turn towards the history department. Then he found the 3-story building, which showed its age, and located his mentor's, Cohen Quentin's office. He knocked and entered the room, but he was shocked to see that the man sitting at his mentor's seat was the academic, Azik. Good morning, Mr. Azik. Where's my mentor? We made an appointment by letter to meet here at 10, Klein asked, puzzled. Azik, who was Cohen Quentin's best friend and often debated with his mentor regarding academic topics, smiled and said, Cohen had a last-minute meeting and went to Tingen University. He asked me to wait for you here. He had bronze skin, an average height and build, black hair, brown eyes, and gentle facial features. Being in his presence brought on an indescribable feeling, as though you could see in the man's eyes that he had been through the vicissitudes of life. Under his right ear was a tiny mole that one wouldn't notice unless closely examined. Having said the reason, Azik suddenly frowned as he carefully observed Klein. Feeling confused by the sudden scrutiny, Klein looked at his attire. Have I committed some breach of etiquette? Tuxedo, black vest, white shirt, black bow tie, dark-colored trousers, leather boots with no buttons. Everything seems normal. Azik's brows eased, and he chuckled softly. Don't mind me. I suddenly noticed that you are way more energetic than before. You look even more like a gentleman now. Thank you for your compliment. Klein accepted it calmly and asked, Mr. Azik, did my mentor manage to find the book Research of the Hornassis Main Peak's Relics in the school library? He found it with my assistance, Azik said, smiling gently. He then pulled open the drawer and took out a gray-covered book. You are no longer a Koy University student anymore. You can read it here, but you cannot take it home. All right. Klein delightfully took the academic monograph with a hint of fear. The book's design was fully in line with current trends. It used hard paper as a hardcover, and it was printed with an image like an abstract version of the main peak of the Hornassis mountain range. Klein took a glance and found a seat. He flipped open the book and started reading carefully, line by line. As he became engrossed in the book, he suddenly realized that there was a cup of rich and fragrant coffee by his side. Help yourself to the sugar and milk. Azik put down the silver saucer and pointed at the milk jar and sugar container. Thank you. Klein nodded with gratitude. He added 3 cubes of sugar and a teaspoon of milk before continuing to read his book. The book, Research of the Hornassis Main Peak's Relics, was not a very thick book. Klein finished reading it when it was almost noon and took note of a few noteworthy points. First, the settlement on the main peak of Hornassis Mountain and its surrounding area was obviously an advanced civilization, which existed as part of an ancient nation. Second, from their wall murals, their perspective on life appeared similar to that of humans. I can assume for now that they were human. Third, they revered yet feared the darkness of the night. Hence, they called their god the ruler of the Evernight, mother of the sky. Fourth, the weirdest part is that researchers haven't found any graves in the entire area, which initially seems to indicate that the people didn't need to be buried because they didn't die. However, that would be contradictory to the contents of the wall murals. In the wall murals, the people in the nation believed that death is not the end. They believed that their deceased family would protect them in the night. Hence, they would keep their deceased family members at home, on the bed, by their side, for a full 3 days. There is nothing beyond that for the wall murals, as it doesn't involve burials. Klein took another sip of coffee and continued to write down his afterthoughts in his notebook. Mother of the Sky? Sky Mother is such a grand title. While the ruler of the Evernight obviously overlaps with the Evernight goddess, is this a contradiction at its roots? In the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range and its surrounding area, every arrangement and decoration was well preserved. Even the wall murals didn't have any signs of damage. Before it was discovered, there seemed to be no disturbance at all. The table was arranged with cutlery, and there were dried stains of rot on the dining plates. In some rooms, there were half-filled bottles of alcohol that had almost turned into plain water. What happened to the nation's people? They seem to have left their homes in a hurry without taking anything with them, and they never returned. Considering how there are no burial grounds, this only makes it weirder. The author, Mr. Joseph, also mentioned that when he first discovered the remains, he even had the belief that the people residing there had just vanished all of a sudden. Klein stopped writing and cast his gaze at an illustration. On John Joseph's third visit to the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range, he had used a new camera model to shoot a monochrome photograph. In the photo, the lofty palace had a collapsed wall and was overgrown with weeds. It followed a grandeur style for its design. When he flipped to the photograph, Klein's first thought was that of the palace he had seen in his dream. The two styles were identical. The only difference was that the one he had dreamed of was on a peak, and it was way more magnificent. It also had a huge chair, a seat of honor, that looked like it didn't seat a human. Countless translucent maggots clustered together and squirmed slowly beneath the chair. I can confirm that my dream is related to the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornasis mountain range. That should be the nation of the Evernight, which was referenced in the Antigonus family's notebook. Klein nodded slightly and closed the book. At that moment, Azik, who was sitting opposite him, touched the inconspicuous mole under his right ear and said, "How was it? Found anything?" "Quite a bit. Take a look. I've written so many pages of notes." Klein pointed at the table and smiled. "I don't understand why you're suddenly so interested in this matter." Azik sighed and said, "Klein, when I was studying at Backlund University, I had dabbled with some divination and did quite a bit of research on that. Well, I discovered that there is disharmony in your fate." "What? Divination? Are you talking to me about divination?" As a seer, Klein looked at Azik the academic in amusement. "How is it disharmonious?" Azik thought for a moment. "Have you encountered many strange coincidences in the past 2 months?" Coincidences? As he was indebted to Mr. Azik, Klein didn't dispute his question as he subconsciously began thinking. If we are talking about coincidences, the most obvious matter was when we were after kidnappers. We actually managed to find clues of the Antigonus family's notebook that was lost for days in the room opposite the kidnappers. Also, Ray Bieber didn't flee from Tingen in a hurry. Instead, he found a place to digest the power bestowed by the notebook, allowing for sealed artifact 2049 to track him down easily. That seemed to be against common sense. Although Ayer Harson gave a reasonable explanation, I always had a nagging feeling that it was somewhat coincidental. Oh, Selena had stolen a glance at Hanas Vincent's secret incantations, but she held back until her birthday dinner banquet to try it out. And I happened to discover it, which is quite a coincidence too. Otherwise, Hanas Vincent wouldn't have been the only one to die so suddenly. Klein thought about it seriously for a few minutes and said, "There are 3. Neither too many nor too frequent. Furthermore, there was nothing that indicated someone's involvement and guidance." Azik nodded slightly. As Emperor Roselle once said, a single coincidence is encountered by anyone. Twice is still normal. Thrice is when one should consider what internal factors are influencing those coincidences. "Can you tell me anything else?" Klein probed. Azik laughed and shook his head. "I can only tell that there's some disharmony, but nothing else. You have to understand that I'm not a real seer." "Isn't that basically equal to saying nothing?" "Mr. Azik is quite odd. He's playing a charlatan in front of a charlatan like me." Klein let out a breath. Seizing the moment when Azik stood up, he pinched his glabella and activated his spirit vision. When he looked over, Azik's aura fully appeared before his eyes, and everything seemed fairly normal. Unfortunately, I can only see the ether body and astral projection of a person above the gray fog. Klein thought carefreely as he tapped his glabella again whilst standing up. Chapter 99, Red Chimney. Late in the afternoon, Klein returned home and drew the curtains, allowing his room to slip into darkness. Perfect. Just the way he liked it. Who needs sunlight when you have existential dread to keep you company? He took out his pen and paper and thought for a long time, finally writing down a sentence. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. That was a fancy way of saying, shit just got weird. As a seer, Klein had tried to divine if those coincidences were a consequence of unnatural developments, but the results showed otherwise. It was like asking a magic 8-ball for relationship advice, unhelpful at best. This time, he was influenced by Azik to look into these events again. He also drew lessons from the sweeted clown. You know, the one who's just a bit too chipper for a guy with a penchant for mischief. He seriously designed an appropriate divination statement, eliminating any descriptions that might be vague or cause confusion. Because nothing says professional like a well-worded freakout. Yes, I should break down the 3 coincidences and divine them separately. Klein nodded in thought as he slowly removed the topaz from his wrist, feeling like a magician revealing his greatest trick. He held the spirit pendulum with his left hand and allowed it to hang close over the divination statement on the paper. It was like a pendulum's way of saying, "This better be good." He collected himself and entered a state of cogitation. With his eyes closed, Klein started chanting repeatedly. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. It felt like a mantra, but with less zen and more confusion. As he recited the statement over and over again, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the pendulum, only to see the topaz turning counterclockwise slowly. It's still a negative, Klein muttered to himself. If only he could get a refund for all this spiritual investment. He designed several other divination statements, but the results persisted. There was nothing strange about that incident. Great, just great. It was as if the universe was giving him the silent treatment. He then separately divined the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tingen and Selena's magic mirror divination incident, but the answers for both events were normal. Who would have thought that mundane could be so, well, mundane? Heh, was I, a real seer frightened by the charlatan Mr. Azik? Besides, Captain and the others didn't feel that anything was off. Klein laughed and shook his head, but he remained cautious. He planned on using the dream divination technique to get a final confirmation. Because nothing says, I have no idea what's happening, like a trip down the dream lane. After some thought, he changed the divination statement to fit the change in method. The true reason for Elliot's kidnapping. As he scribbled with the fountain pen, Klein paused and pondered over his words. Was it too late to call in a psychic? After reading it over and over again, he tore the slip of paper and walked toward his bed. He relaxed and laid down. With the divination statement in hand, Klein quickly fell asleep with the help of cogitation. The true miracle, managing to find peace while teetering on the edge of insanity. He found himself in a contorted, broken world. Regaining his senses, he began swimming through the blur. It was like being in a bad trip. Lots of colors, very little sense. Gradually, he saw the few kidnappers. He saw them lose their final chip at a gambling table, saw them obtain guns from underground sources, and saw them survey the area. They even rented the apartment across Ray Bieber's apartment as their hideout. Talk about neighborly love. These didn't form a continuous scene. Instead, they were presented in the form of flashing pictures. Klein couldn't find anything that was abnormal. Just a bunch of guys living their best, criminal lives. Furthermore, it had also aligned with the statements given by the kidnappers. So much for being a seer. Maybe he should switch to fortune cookies. After exiting the dream, Klein separately divined the other 2 incidents, but had the same result. Their developments followed logic. The coincidences were really coincidences. Life really was just a series of unfortunate events, wasn't it? I was indeed overthinking things. Mr. Azik is merely a divination enthusiast. Klein stabilized his pendulum and shook his head with a bitter smile. Who knew that overthinking could be his greatest skill? He was about to draw the curtains and allow sunlight into the room when he froze. From the original Klein's impression of Mr. Azik, he is a dependable and trustworthy person. He had never once said anything baseless. Even if he was always quarreling with Mentor, it was limited to academic topics, and each of them had their reasons. If he was truly a mere divination enthusiast, he wouldn't have interacted with me like that. And the memories of original Klein have nothing about him liking divination. Of course, this could be due to the loss of corresponding memories. Klein frowned and couldn't ease his worries. He needed a way to confirm this. Because at this point, he needed a guide to navigate this maze of confusion. He suspected that Mr. Azik had unwittingly come across some insider information and was trying to remind him by using divination as an excuse. Kind of like when your friend tries to drop hints about a surprise party, but you just think they forgot your birthday. How should I confirm this? Klein paced back and forth across the dark room, trying to recall the other divination techniques he knew. He might as well have been pacing in a sitcom, waiting for the punchline to drop. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He suddenly halted as an idea came to him. Let's assume that these coincidences are dubious. I'm unable to divine a result either because my sequence isn't high enough or I'm being affected by outside interference. But I can change my environment. I can change my environment to some place that is even more mysterious and even harder to understand. Klein felt pumped. He pulled open his drawer and took out a silver dagger, feeling a little like a kid with a new toy. He concentrated and allowed his spirituality to flow out from the tip of the dagger, becoming one with his surroundings. So very dramatic. With each step he took, the wall of spirituality sealed off the entire room. It was like he was setting up an impenetrable fortress against, well, whatever was out there. Klein planned on doing the divination above the gray fog, to do the divination in that mysterious world. Because who wouldn't want to add divination to their list of things to do before I die? In the magnificent ancient divine hall above the endless gray fog, Klein sat at the seat of honor on one end of the bronze table. Before him was a piece of goatskin he willed into existence. A real upgrade from paper, very fancy. He lifted a pen and tried writing the divination statement as he had previously. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. Such an eloquent way to say, somebody's messing with me. He held the spirit pendulum and hung it low. Klein quickly composed himself as he turned silent and ethereal, like a ghost who really got into character. Half closing his eyes, he recited the statement 7 times, using his spirituality to interact with the spiritual world that stood above all. It was like a game of telephone, but here's your chapter with some added humor and adjustments while keeping the original content intact. Chapter 99, Red Chimney. Late in the afternoon, Klein returned home and drew the curtains, allowing his room to slip into darkness. Perfect. Just the way he liked it. Who needs sunlight when you have existential dread to keep you company? He took out his pen and paper and thought for a long time, finally writing down a sentence. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. That was a fancy way of saying, shit just got weird. As a seer, Klein had tried to divine if those coincidences were a consequence of unnatural developments, but the results showed otherwise. It was like asking a magic 8-ball for relationship advice, unhelpful at best. This time, he was influenced by Azik to look into these events again. He also drew lessons from the sweeted clown. You know, the one who's just a bit too chipper for a guy with a penchant for mischief. He seriously designed an appropriate divination statement, eliminating any descriptions that might be vague or cause confusion. Tap, tap, tap. Klein tapped on the side of the table sometime later and slipped into deep thought. Red chimney, garden, grass plains. How is this related to the person behind all of this? I cannot determine his motive from the coincidences, nor can I conclude that there is any evil intent. In the midst of this thinking, Klein felt alarmed for himself, Captain, Fry, and the others. We are like puppets dancing on a string. What's even scarier is that we thought so highly of ourselves. Sigh. I don't know how to raise this matter to Captain. Old Neil's divination produced the same results as mine in the outside world. If they ask me to confirm it in front of them, I have no way of doing that. Klein rubbed his temples as if he had a headache, After nearly 20 seconds of calm, he began divining the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tianjin. Similarly, he first used spirit dowsing. This time, Klein was shocked to see his topaz hang motionless. It was neither a confirmation nor rejection of the statement. Strange, he muttered. He started to guess the reasons for this phenomenon. The person behind this has sensed my divinations and engaged in countermeasures? Following this, he tried the dream divination technique, but all he saw were fragmented pieces of fog. He no longer made any new discoveries. The results of Selena's magic mirror divination incident were the same. Klein could almost confirm his conjecture at this point. Since he had no way of notifying Captain Dunn Smith for the time being, he had an unprecedented motivation to improve his abilities. I must head to the divination club later and quickly succeed in my acting to digest the seer potion. Also, I have to confirm whether the clown potion is indeed the subsequent sequence of seer, as well as gather clues about it. In addition, I have to interact more with Mr. Azik and see if I can dig up whatever inside information he holds. Klein held his forehead with his right palm and quickly drew up a plan and determined his focal point. After some thought, a goatskin appeared in front of him again. He picked up his pen and wrote, "The corresponding sequence 8 of sequence 9 seer is clown." From his prior experience, the present Klein was completely convinced that his divination abilities were augmented and enhanced above the gray fog. Just like how raids are usually successful, is this the result of having good luck? He muttered and picked up his spirit pendulum. Sometime later, Klein received a definitive answer. The corresponding sequence 8 of sequence 9 seer was clown. He then wrote on the paper once again. The corresponding sequences 8, 7, 6, and 5 of seer would grant at least one brand new unrelated power. Klein exhaled as he tried spirit dowsing again. However, he saw the topaz hang motionlessly without any rotations. There isn't enough information to complete the divination and receive a revelation? He muttered to himself while seemingly deep in thought. Then he set down the silver chain and began considering the required statement for a dream divination. Nearly 20 seconds later, he picked up his fountain pen and wrote seriously, "Clues to the clown potion." Chapter 100, Interpreting Symbols. Clues to the clown potion. On the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table, Klein repeated the divination statement a few times before leaning back and entering a deep sleep. You know, the kind where you forget you were supposed to pay your electric bill. His surroundings quickly became peaceful and quiet. He saw a hazy view, with countless distorted and blurry scenes flashing past, just like drops of morning dew on tender flower petals, or like your ex's face when you try to remember why you broke up. Gradually, Klein grasped his spirituality and came to his senses. He saw a fireplace before him with a rocking chair in front of it. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Guess that's what happens when you take dressing for success too seriously. Although he couldn't see her face since she was hanging her head low, Klein's gut feeling told him that she was an old lady. And he was pretty certain about it. She wasn't exactly the life of the party, unless the party involved knitting and complaining about the youth of today. The old lady was facing a desk directly. There were newspapers and tin cans inlaid with silver on the desk. A real hoarder, Klein thought, but at least she knows how to recycle. Klein found the scene before his eyes very familiar, and he quickly recognized what he saw. This was where Ray Bieber and his mother stayed. This was where he saw a bloated cadaver for the first time. You never forget your first cadaver. It's like a rite of passage in the spooky life. There are clues that point to the clown potion here. Just as Klein's thoughts flashed past, the scene around him transformed. It was a grayish-white warehouse, hidden among identical buildings. Perfect place to hide from your responsibilities, right? There were white bones scattered all around, and a few balls of flesh that looked like they had been squashed by a boulder. Looks like someone didn't skip leg day at the gym, or their last meal. In the middle of the warehouse was a grayish-white object that was the size of a fist. Its surface was filled with ditches, and it looked soft but ductile. It looked like a brain that had been extracted out of a living being. Talk about a bad hair day. Just as Klein recognized the scene and recalled something, The scene before him distorted like rippling water before transforming into another new blurry scene. A naked body was laid on a long table covered with a white cloth. There were some bluish, discolored patches on the corpse's skin. Well, that's one way to ensure nobody else wants to borrow your outfit, Klein muttered, trying to lighten the mood. Klein suddenly knitted his eyebrows and muttered, "It was first the images of Ray Bieber's hiding place and his remains, and now it's related to the brand on the sweeted clown's wrist?" Just as he attempted to speculate what the scenes meant, the scene suddenly changed again. A marble coffee table, a set of 2 leather couches, and a chandelier that hung high on the ceiling. Classy, but not quite enough to distract from the weirdness of the place. There were 3 people. Klein Moretti, who had black hair, brown eyes, and a scholarly temperament, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, and a beautiful young lady with fishnet gloves. She looked like she walked straight out of a bad decisions support group. Following that, it was another 3 people and an object, a middle-aged man in a black robe who had thick, spiky brown hair, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, a half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and gray-blue eyes, and a black notebook on the round table in between all of them, a notebook that exuded an ancient and distant air. A family heirloom? No, just a really bad college thesis. The Antigonus family's notebook. Klein suddenly sat up straight and the dream vanished. Looking outside the divine hall where there was boundless gray fog and crimson stars, he thought in both shock and confusion. I was divining for clues to the clown potion. Why would the Antigonus family's notebook show up? Seems like the universe loves to throw a curveball at me. Let me think. That chubby guy was Welch. Yes, Welch, an unfortunate fella who bought the Antigonus family's notebook and triggered a sequence of incidents. The beautiful young lady wearing fishnet gloves was Naya, and she was definitely the type to steal your heart and your wallet. I remember the marble coffee table and leather couch combination is a hallmark of Welch's place. I saw spirit medium daily there. So, what's the verdict? Is it a ghost or just a really drunk guy? In other words, what I saw was Welch's living room. It was a scene where the original Klein and his 2 classmates were discussing the notebook. Klein calmed himself down and tapped on the edge of the long bronze table rhythmically, just like tapping your fingers to your favorite jam, but without the good vibes. Then, what does the last scene represent? The notebook appeared. Welch appeared. Could it be the scene where he bought the ancient item? Or just another episode of Antiques Roadshow? There were another 2 people, and one of them looked very familiar. I feel like I've seen the middle-aged man in the classic black robe somewhere before. That spiky brown hair, severe dark eye circles? Yes, I know who he is now. Hannas Vincent from the Divination Club, the Hannas Vincent who died peacefully after Captain snuck into his dream, having learned that Selena secretly obtained the secret incantation from him. Sounds like a real plot twist, huh? No way. He was the one that sold the notebook to Welch? Everything appears to be coming full circle. The world sure is small. No, Tingen is really small. On careful thought, it really is a possibility that Hannas Vincent wasn't an ordinary fortune teller. He was obviously deep into mysticism and obtained the attention of an ancient evil god. Talk about networking. He had the channels, ability, and opportunity to acquire the notebook that was accidentally released by the secret order. It's no wonder Captain and company never figured out where Welch bought the notebook. Their investigative approach was entirely wrong. They had attempted to investigate via the antique market, but when the actual whereabouts of the notebook was found, they gave up on that lead. Classic rookie mistake. What a pity. Hannas Vincent just passed away not too long ago. Otherwise, we definitely could have found out something regarding the notebook. Since he was involved in mysticism, he should have researched the notebook. His death was way too coincidental. Seems like the universe has a twisted sense of humor. However, there was another person at the scene, a man in his 50s. He might know quite a bit of what happened. Klein stopped tapping his fingers on the edge of the table and looked through every scene of his dream divination once more. Ray Bieber's house, Ray Bieber's hideout spot, the remains of Ray Bieber, the brand on the suited clown's wrist, Welch's house, Welch, Naya, and original Klein's exchange. Welch, Hanass Vincent, and the Antigonus family notebook's group photo. Hehe, besides the brand on the sweeted clown, everything else is directly related to the Antigonus family's notebook. But I had divined for clues to the clown potion. This isn't scientific, nor does it make mystical sense. Just like trying to figure out why your friend thought it was a good idea to date their ex again. After becoming a seer, Klein once tried to divine where Welch had bought the Antigonus family's notebook, but he never considered using the unique qualities that the area above the gray fog possessed. As such, he had failed to receive any revelations, but now he had chanced upon the truth by divining something separate. After spending nearly 20 seconds to calm down, Klein summarized the context provided by Roselle's diary and attempted to interpret his dream divination. The first possibility, Zaratul, or should I say the Secret Order, was searching and pursuing the relics of the Antigonus family. So, the symbolic meaning of the dream is to use matters related to the Antigonus family to lure the Secret Order into appearing. Having thought of this, Klein massaged his forehead and suddenly realized the limitations of a seer. Unless it was a very simple and straightforward sign, a seer had to be extremely careful when making interpretations. It was just like walking on the edge of the abyss or walking on a thin layer of ice over a lake's surface. The suited clown's outcome was an actual and bloody example of what a single mistake in interpretation or failure to grasp a key point could result in. In that instant, Klein had an illusion of himself mastering the true essence of a seer. He seemed to be just one step away from digesting the potion completely. "Thank you for enlightening me with your life. Praise the lady," he muttered and drew a crimson moon before his chest. Then he divined whether Azek had good intentions or if he was an amazing beyonder. He received confirmations for both of them. Eventually, the continuous divinations exhausted Klein. He had no choice but to stop churning through his thoughts and decide on the crucial matters that he needed to attend to. I have to find the man that appeared in the same scene with Welch, Hanass Vincent, and the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. I can begin my search with the Divination Club. I can't just confront Mr. Azik. Yes, he might be a mid-sequence beyonder of the life school of thought, but there's a lack of information, making it impossible for me to divine. Phew. Klein let out a breath and conjured the portrait of the half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and gray-blue eyes on the goatskin that appeared before him. This was the third person present when the Antigonus family's notebook was traded between Welch and Hanass Vincent. Looking at the portrait, Klein suddenly fell into a dilemma. I can't draw. During art class in primary school, I was always the one receiving the greatest criticism from the teachers. Should I use ritualistic magic like Old Neil? This was done by praying to the goddess. If I were to use the uniqueness of the area above the gray fog, I would be in trouble if the divinities noticed something amiss. Hold on a second. Perhaps I can pray to myself. Transmitting images and transmitting voices are similar. Although I'm temporarily unable to access the mysterious power above the gray fog, accomplishing such a minor matter shouldn't be a problem. Having thought of this, Klein immediately emanated his spirituality to envelop himself to stimulate the feeling of falling. Back in his bedroom, he lit the gas lamp and prayed. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your revelation and pray that you allow me to draw what I've seen. After reciting the incantation, Klein didn't splash essential oils or burn any herbs to gain the help of their powers. It was just that informal when praying to oneself. There were suddenly murmurs in his ears as he saw the 4 black dots that formed a square surface on the back of his hand. He walked 4 steps counterclockwise and recited the incantation before penetrating the maniacal chaos to return to the area above the gray fog. This time, he didn't see any of the crimson stars shrinking or expanding. But behind the seat of honor at the long bronze table, the strange symbol formed by a partial pupilless eye and partial contorted lines shimmered weakly as it produced illusory prayers. Klein held his ear to it and listened. After making sure that there were no mistakes, he conjured the portrait of the third person and cast it towards the flowing light in accordance to the prayer's format. After everything was done, he immediately left the mysterious world above the gray fog and returned to his bedroom. Just as he found his footing, a portrait surfaced immediately in front of Klein's eyes. Furthermore, he sensed a weak and illusory power augmenting him. He picked up a fountain pen and found a piece of white paper and expressed his intent. Klein was surprised to find his right hand moving uncontrollably as it quickly drew lines. Before long, he saw a lifelike portrait of the third person. After writing down the hair and eye colors, as well as other unique characteristics, Klein heaved a sigh of relief despite the spasms of his right hand. The illusion before his eyes rapidly dissipated.